Now, expanding on the generative AI topic, I have the pleasure of welcoming on stage Hans van Dam, founder of Conversation Design Institute, who will share with us his expert insights into conversation design in the age of LLMs. Hans, please come on stage.
I think you stole the clicker. Are you still holding the thing?
Oh, sorry.
That's good. There's a logo on the screen. That's good. Hi, everybody. Last speaker of the event, pretty much. So thank you all for being here with us. So this is us, Conversation Design Institute. So we help you figure out how to build good chatbots. A lot of companies are focused on, getting the stuff to work and what to say. We focus on how to say it. That's kind of the way we're set up. And we have a nonprofit called CDI Foundation. That's where we learn how to do these things. And then we've got CDI where we teach you how to do it. And then we've got a consulting firm that will actually, spend some time with you and do it with you. Last year, I was asked to give a TED Talk about ChatGPT and OpenAI. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. Because it was always a dream to give a TED Talk. Turns out it's not your dream to give a TED Talk, it's a dream to have given a TED Talk. Very different things, because it's very painful, very nerve-wracking to give a TED Talk, and particularly if you're doing it on the topic of OpenAI and ChatGPT. Because every time I would come up with something and I would have a little story to tell, and we'd do a rehearsal, and then OpenAI released a feature and everything could go out the window. It's like, oh, LLM's too expensive, and they cut the cost by 10% or by tenfold, right? It was very difficult. So eventually I came up with the solution for this problem that I had, because they were really like, there's 2 weeks out, you need to come up with something. So Ted keeps calling me. His name is not Ted, by the way, but that should not be legal. But I figured out, why don't I just have ChatGPT write my TED Talk? And I'm now officially the first person in the world that has delivered a TED Talk written by ChatGPT. And it was kind of neat because it helped me figure out like how large language models work, because I had a certain intention, but how do I get the model to say what I want it to say, and how do I polish it up, and how do I make it better? And I learned a lot about how to design with that stuff. So I'm going to talk about some of those findings. So for us as a company, we've been around for a couple of years. We've got about 8,000 students around the world. They work at enterprises building conversational AI applications at scale. And what we teach them is really technology agnostic. What's the conversation that you want to have with people? What does that look like? And then how do we use technology to deliver that conversation at scale consistently? That's how we approach it. So think of it this way. Everybody's selling hammers, and we're training carpenters. That's our position. So why are we doing this in the first place, right? So conversational AI, and we all know that, but on one hand, we have automation goals in our business, right? We want to reduce cost, automate, become more efficient, and we want to have a great customer experience. And on one hand, they seem like opposing goals, right? But conversational AI allows us to unify those goals if we do it well, right? So we have automation goals and customer experience goals. And if you haven't gone to business school, top right corner. That's where you want to be on all these graphs. If you see a graph like this, top right corner, that's where you want to be. So great customer experience, a lot of scope. So why is it so hard to build good chatbots or voice assistants in your call center, right? It seems like this is the problem. We have an artificial brain talk to a human brain, and they both have their own limitations and capabilities and triggers that they need in order to function. So the artificial brain, they need to understand intent, they need to extract entities, they need to understand context, and we're getting really good at that, right? If you look at all the demos here in these past few days, it's super cool and it's really impressive. But on the other hand, we have a human brain, and a human brain, in order for that to function, it needs empathy. Sometimes it needs a compliment. Sometimes it needs a little guidance. And the brain simply needs that in order to function. So yes, it's important to understand what people say, but it's just as important for people to feel understood. And that's kind of where a lot of these chatbots break, because people they're getting the right answer, but they're not getting what they need. And those are two very different things. So conversation design is a blocker. And if we think about that, you've got scope, your automation goals, and customer experience. And that top right corner, that is lots of automation, great customer experience. That's the holy grail. Multi-channel, omni-channel, different languages, and all that stuff. But it seems like a lot of times as we start out, we're discovering we're building some FAQ chatbots, and then we always seem to end up at the top left quadrant, where we've built all these use cases and we have all this scope, but we're not really getting the value that we're looking for. And a lot of times it has to do with not having properly designed the experience, and people just kind of going like, about all of that. So what we've been doing, it's pretty nerdy, is figure out sort of per level of development of your chatbot, what kind of design patterns you would want to need for that. So if I'm just doing an FAQ chatbot, it's like I'm designing for function. Being able to speak to people in a very proper way gets the job done. But as conversations become longer, more complex, transactional, the conversations, I need to start designing for trust. Tone of voice becomes important. How do I make people feel comfortable? If I really go omni-channel and I really want to guide people, I'm thinking about what's the desired behavior? How do I get people to do what I want them to do? How do I get them away maybe from live agents, or sometimes actually get them there? So as your chatbot gets more advanced in scope, there are specific design patterns that you start adding as you get to that new level. So we'll start exploring that a little bit. And I think a lot of people are now like, okay, but what's conversation design really? Because now with the world of LLMs, people are like, do you still need it? What is it? Can an LLM just do all of that? And I think conversation design, if we're building a chatbot, it's not about getting that thing to speak in the most natural way. I couldn't care less. It's about using elements of natural language to help customers achieve their goals. So in a way, it is way more than the script of a movie or in a novel or a TV show, rather than how people actually speak. Right? So we're using patterns of natural language in movies to advance the plot or give them character development, and that keeps us engaged and helps us get to the finish line of that movie. So when we're thinking about chatbots, it's about the customer journey that we want to advance and giving them a brand experience. So a lot of, if you would compare what a good chatbot looks like, it's way more than a movie script than actually how people speak. So I think when we think about conversation design, it's really about how do we want the system to speak to people so that they achieve their goals, rather than how do we make this sound natural. I think that's a big distinction that a lot of people overlook. So does generative AI make this stuff obsolete? I think if you generally very abstract look at this stuff, it's like an LLM is going to get you there faster. It can create stuff faster. You can deploy something faster, and you can create value faster. But if you're just leaning on an LLM, you're leaving a lot of value on the table. And I think in a lot of the use cases that we see here, it's supporting the agent, and then the agent does the last mile delivery on the use case, right? Or it's suggesting it to the designer, and the designer makes it better. So it's always the expert effort that you need when you're building these systems. So as we talk about what conversation design is, I want to show a little more about what the patterns are that you can expect and what that looks like. Right? So if we go to that first level of designing for function, these are quite basic. This is pretty easy for an LLM to handle. So let's say I have a sentence, okay, you want to buy sneakers, do you know which ones? Very simple sentence. The pattern that we use here is acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. How this works, very important in call centers. I hear you, I understand you. So by repeating back to people that it's about buying sneakers, they feel confidence in that whatever is coming next is going to be relevant to them, right? So you always want to have this design pattern. I hear you, I understand you, now it's your turn to speak again. This is a design pattern that you always need. So go to your chatbots or call centers tomorrow, see if all your dialogues have this structure. If they don't, great. You can make it much better, faster. But the important thing is you always need to have a question at the end, right? Because if you ask a question, if a chatbot asks a question in a call center, and then it continues to speak, you get those annoying situations where you're speaking over each other and the whole system breaks, where it's like, oh, you go, you go, you go, or you sometimes have with people when you're on the phone and speaking at the same time. So really a big mistake that you want to avoid at all times is to have a question in the middle of a sentence. Well, if we now ask just ChatGPT to ask a similar question, you already see that there's a question in the middle of the answer. So this is like a good conversation designer would never allow this, right? And sure, you can tweak your prompts and make it better, but I think overall it's very good to know that most of these large language models are not trained on what makes a good chatbot dialogue. They're trained on I don't know, marketing copy or essays on Wikipedia and all of that stuff. So those design patterns that are crucial in creating a good conversational experience have never really been part of the training sets of these LLMs, which you can prompt for and make better, but it's good to be aware of. But so you can solve this level with LLMs and run it real time, use RAG models and do all of that. But if you would now sort of go up one notch to a higher level of conversation design, where I think a lot of value is that most companies are not aware of what you can do here, you'll see that LLMs are going to struggle even more. So when we think about designing chatbots or call center assistants, we think about behavior. What is it that we want people to do or don't want to do? So it's never about answering a question. It's about answering the questions so that they are empowered to do X, Y, Z. And the way to think about it is by using the BJ Fogg behavioral model, which says you can prompt desired behavior by having the right balance of motivation, ability, and the right prompt. Pretty much means when people are super motivated, it can be a little harder, and the other way around. And what we've done at CDI is figure out what kind of writing techniques and design patterns we can apply for each situation. So if we're in a customer service use case and we're dealing with maybe angry customers, we have very specific patterns that we can apply to take away that emotion so that they feel comfortable going through this journey. So yeah, well, like I said, we get nerdy about this. So we have all these different writing techniques. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to help you find the right sneakers. Does that sound good? What I'm doing now is anticipatory enthusiasm. So I'm putting the image that somebody's going to be successful and have the right sneakers. I'm putting that in their minds. This is the reason airliners show you a picture of the destination. So you already picture yourself being there, right? Expectation management. I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions, right? Or social proof. For most people, this only takes a minute. So I'm taking that same sentence. I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions. For most people, this only takes a minute. So very many people are doing the same thing like I'm doing now, and they are successful. That is at a subconscious level what people are feeling. So they're happy to talk to this chatbot, and you'll see the numbers go up. And you can add some personality. I'm going to run you through 3 things. And another one is choice architecture. 2 buttons, but both are positive answers. If you give more positive answers, you increase the likelihood of somebody selecting a positive answer. This is, of course, over the top, but I just want to show you that if you have very specific use cases in your organization that are driving a lot of volume, this is a toolkit that you have access to that a lot of companies are not aware of. So one simple chatbot message has more than, because we're not even talking about active language, simple language, it has more than 10 design patterns that make it good. Right? And this is what conversation design is. So when we're in a discussion of will an LLM replace conversation design, yeah, if you don't really know what you're doing, probably. If you really want to get to this level, it's going to take a little longer for it to reach that. So if I ask in ChatGPT again, like it's all over the place. You see questions everywhere. It's very strange language. It doesn't know how to do these things, which is okay. So yeah, I think LLMs will definitely help us with those first levels of conversation design, but then it just gets way more complex and they get stuck. So, and I think this is kind of the trend in these past 2 days, right, of you know, how do these things relate to each other? And how do they work together? And this is the model that I've been playing around with. I think over time, like people are creating stuff right now, and AI is supporting them in their work. And over time, AI will be creating more, and people will be supervising that and making sure that it does what we want. So if we have very intent-based use cases, we've got the declarative bots. We have our intents. We've got a co-pilot giving the designers suggestions to be more effective and be more productive. And that just gets the job done faster. And on the other side of the spectrum, we just have these LLMs that are intentless, that are just talking to customers. And I think the reality is that per use case, and this is what conversation design will be, the people on your team, per use case, they got to figure out, is this something that I want to give to an LLM? Maybe it is, like Thijs just showed, the first part of the conversation, classification, let the LLM do that, then go to in a declarative path that we completely designed. At the end of it, if they have different questions or they want to talk about the weather, the LLM can take over. So that entire design piece is what conversation design is right now. Where I think initially it was like, how does the bot talk? But now is it, where do we use the LLM and where don't we use the LLM? It's becoming more important. And I think it is part of the job of the conversation designer to sort of think about that stuff. And a lot of it has to do with, for every use case, how important is the outcome? How important is that the outcome is accurate? And what's our risk tolerance around this specific topic? Well, we are all here in an enterprise world, so risk tolerance is 0, and it's very important that all the answers are right. But you can imagine if we have an experience talking about the weather, do I need to bring a sweater? I mean, you roll the dice on that one, right? It's okay, it doesn't really matter. So there's definitely, outside of our little enterprise world, a lot of room for, more open systems than what we can maybe imagine right now. So a new thing that we've been thinking about is how do we check the quality of chatbots at scale, right? And the thing that we've been doing now is taking all of these design patterns and putting them in one API. And that API can now test messages, the messages that either your designers create or your LLM creates. We test it against those design patterns and we can score them, giving you the confidence to whether or not you want to actually say that to customers. So we can check it for UX, compliance, brand guidelines, business practices that are important. So if I say, what does Kodaku do? Your chatbot has this long answer, and you immediately get all this feedback on there, right? So instead of a chatbot saying, I can help you with this, it's actually more human-centered to say, what would you like help with, right? So don't be bot-centric, be human-centric, and those sort of things. If it's too long, we shorten it. If it doesn't end with a question, we flag it. If it says, I promise you your cart will be there next week, it immediately gets flagged as well. So that's one of the things that we're doing right now around LLMs to make it easier for conversation designers, where they can be more productive with these systems and get to a higher quality faster as well. Because even though we're using this to test LLMs, we're of course also using LLMs to do this. So if you see this, score goes up immediately as we shorten this message and make it a little better. If you want to know more about that, there's a QR code. Yeah. Now, it's really neat. You can test sort of your entire chatbot corpus that you might already have, run it against those rules. You can use it as a co-pilot. So if you're working in Cognigy via the browser, you can get some feedback. Or if you're running a real-time LLM in real time, we can actually use it as a gatekeeper. But I don't think there's going to be many of you in the audience today that want to do that. So the last thing I want to talk about really is that what we've learned is that we figured out how to make a good chatbot. Like we nailed that. Very advanced levels. What does the experience look like? We could figure that out. But we also learned that it's not just about the chatbot. It's about the organization that is creating that chatbot. If that doesn't work, if that's not right, you're going to get stuck at one point, right? So if we look at those different altitudes of development, from going, at the beginning it's nothing but potential, it becomes an FAQ bot, it becomes a little more integrated, eventually it becomes proactive and omni-channel, and then it's like the movie Her, that beautiful AI assistant that can talk about anything with everyone and know everything. It's a journey. And the way to think about that is through 4 elements. We call it mindset, skill set, culture, and systems. On one hand, it's like the individual's way of how they perceive the work they're doing, the ability that they have to execute the work, but also the context in which they do that. Do you have a conversational culture? How do you develop that in your organization? And then the technology and the tools and systems that you need to actually deliver on it. And what you'll see is that the environment you need at the beginning of a project, you want an environment of innovation where people feel safe to fail and they can just try stuff out. Whereas if you really get to scale, it becomes more about de-risking the operation, etc. So as you're doing this, you should sort of develop all quadrants at the same time, right? And what we see a lot of times, what happens is that we'll start out with our FAQ chatbot. We see the potential, everybody's excited, we increase the budgets, and then we invest. But technology scales way faster than the people's skill set. So what you see, we start developing the technology, adding a lot of scope, but the skill set doesn't develop as quickly, so then we don't get the value from the technology. Then the culture kind of starts to crumble because stakeholders get upset that they're not hitting their numbers. The team members get a little demotivated. So it starts to look like this. And that's generally how you end up in this quadrant. where squandering, where we're focused on scope and we're not getting the value. And the reason for that is that technology scales way faster than people's ability to actually leverage that technology. So that's why we're very focused on sort of pacing your way into a very high volume scaled operation. So last checklist, 40 seconds, brilliant. Whenever you do anything, these are my takeaways at the end of each talk. Take a deep breath. I think that's an important one, because at the end of the day, we are creating something for other people. And a lot of times we're just, oh, they're users, they have a problem. There's 1,000 people that have this, and we just try to design away that problem, but we don't really think about the people behind it. So take a deep breath. Have the conversation. Say the stuff out loud. If you see a script in your chatbot and you read it out loud and it sounds written or it sounds bad, it's bad. Rewrite it. If it sounds better when you say it out loud, it's probably better. Active language, simple language, discourse markers. An important one, pass the one breath test. If you see a message and you can't say it in one breath, it's too long. It's very simple. Right? So whenever you go to your chatbot, you check for acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. Make sure you got that design pattern. You take a deep breath. You say it out loud. If it's too long, you shorten it. If you do this tomorrow, I promise you, your results are already going to be much better. So thank you. Also, this is if you want to get lots of QR codes today, isn't it fun? I see the phones go up. Now, we're doing this cool thing. We have a little program, so if you got your chatbot, we can do a quick scan and sort of test it against those design patterns, and you know where you stand. So we'll put you on that axe of scope and customer experience to kind of see where you're at and some recommendations on how to proceed. If there are any questions, then we're more than happy to entertain your curiosity.